Here in America, we often hear bloviating politicians and pundits talk about a war on women. And more often than not, it's used as a flamethrower in partisan discourse, but rarely, if ever, has any real meat to it. It's a catchphrase. It's a toy to those who have no idea what they're really talking about. Let's discuss for a few moments the real war on women. The one where certain groups of men seek to treat women like cockroaches and less, and use them as killing devices, where young girls would rather kill themselves than live in bondage, where a seething hate for women exists every single day, and the world far too often just watches and turns away. Welcome back, President of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, Yazidi Jasser. Yazidi, let's get right to it here, because we're talking specifically about a CNN report today that talked about some numbers. Quoting UNICEF, saying that 3/4 of all child bombers are girls. They find them, they abduct them, they use them to kill. Does this not tell us that there is simply just an abject hate for women by Islamic extremists?
Gosh, I never thought I'd be looking at the term as hate as mild, but it is beyond hate. They use them in an inhuman kind of way, where they rape them and torture them to the point in which suicide bombing becomes their way out of that hell. And they basically try to, by agreeing to become bombers, hundreds of them end up deploying as bombers, and by doing so they get themselves out of this continued torture. And sometimes they're told that if they don't do the suicide bombing missions, that their families would also be tortured. So you wonder why they use women. Not only is it because they dehumanize them, but they want to spare the men so they can use them in war. So it is just a Orwellian, just bizarre, frightening use of humanity by the radicals. And this tells you why we have to eradicate ISIS.
Let's focus, though, on the women here, because everything you've said is very true. But I want to get your opinion and just dig a little bit deeper on this. They use the women because they view them as lower than vermin at many times. They view them as expendable. And if we are going to sit here and pontificate about a war on women, whether it's in America or any place else around the world, do we not have to say that this is the war on women? This happens every day. And quite frankly, Yazidi, we don't see a lot of governments, major countries around the world, doing much about it at all.
Well, Ed, because the slippery slope here doesn't the most extreme case makes the rule, in that we see that it doesn't just sort of end up with ISIS, but you have Saudi Arabia, where the chief mufti today said that women would never drive in Saudi Arabia because it's evil for them to be alone. So here you have the founding fathers of ISIS in Saudi Arabia treating women as chattel in their society. In Iran, the Shia version of political Islam, same thing. You have sticks where they hit them if their dresses are too short. You see it throughout the Muslim majority world, where you have continuum of what we call honor violence or honor abuse, which is done to the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of women that suffer, where ISIS is simply the tip of the iceberg. But we see it because it's the war that we're paying attention to, and it's a violent army that is attacking us in the West. So we pay more attention to it, but yet it is a pathology of the majority of the population across the Muslim world.
What's being done, though? And I use 270 schoolgirls. This was a huge story. It was all over Twitter. The schoolgirls that were abducted from Nigeria in April of 2014. We are now more than 2 years past that. And after all that wonderful Twitter sphere notice that was given to it, Yazidi, we don't hear anybody talking about this at all. Is there anybody, anywhere in the world, doing anything to try and stop this?
This is what happens, Ed, when you have a president that does hashtag diplomacy and hashtag activism rather than actual strategic solutions. Boko Haram has two ends of the extreme equation. One is where they abducted 200 girls many years ago. We still don't know what happened to them. And the other is where they use them as part of their militant Islamist attacks, suicide bombing, etc. Both demonstrate a deep pathology that must be attacked. It must be, whether we need special forces, whether we need to put the Nigerian government on watch and on notice that we will hold them accountable to the way their populations are treated. But unfortunately, we've denigrated down to hashtag diplomacy, and it's ineffective, as you just pointed out, and how many years later?
I've only got 60 seconds left, but is it not fair to say we get it about the Obama administration and the fact that American politics do this as well, but this is global, Yazidi. We don't hear people, we We don't hear the English, the British, the French, the others in the African nations. We don't hear those other countries that are doing it as well. Is it not fair to say that they are just as inept and just as looking off to the side as America is on this?
Absolutely. This is a battle not between America and the Islamist misogynists, but between the West, Western civilization, freedom, liberty, a society based in the equality of men and women in Europe and in the West versus the Islamists. And there are so many fighting for their survival in those societies. And actually within Belgium, for example, in Brussels with Molenbeek, societies within societies, we just had the Commissioner for Equality in France come out and say that there are nations within nations in France. They can't treat that disease unless they own up to the misogyny within those communities that are under that underbelly of radicalism that we see as ISIS and Boko Haram.
These girls have no food, no clothing. They put up their hands. They volunteer to become suicide killers simply because they want to stop being raped and being held in bondage. It is frightening, and it is more than just America. It is the world that needs to pay attention. Yazidi, Jasser, it's always a pleasure, my friend. Thanks so much for joining us.